depression, negative affect, which is like experiencing feelings like irritability and shame on a regular basis, and insecure attachment are all relationship risk factors. And if people are able to establish what we call a secure functioning relationship, a relationship where both people feel safe and heard and important, those risk factors don't matter. From the Relationship Center, I'm psychotherapist and dating coach Jessica Engel, and this is I Love You Too, a show about how to create and sustain meaningful relationships.
I'm professional certified coach Josh Van Vliet, and on today's episode, we're going to talk about what to look for in a long-term partner. We're so happy you're here, and please remember that this show is not a substitute for a relationship with a licensed mental health professional. So this is such a juicy topic today. I'm really excited to get into this with you. We're talking about what to look for in a long-term partner. And we've got a couple of questions that we're going to be digging into around this that I'm so excited to hear what you have to share because I don't know, in fact, what you're going to share today. And the first question, well, I'm just going to share all three questions actually as kind of an overview of where we're headed in this episode, the kind of things that we're going to get into.
Great.
We're going to start with what does science say about what makes a good partner?
Wonderful.
And then look at how do I, meaning you, the listener, clarify what you need in a partner. How do you clarify what you need in a partner? Because there are some things that may be pretty consistent across relationships that indicate this tends to work well in a relationship. And there may be certain things that you are looking for in a partnership that may be different. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to look a little bit at this question of how do I clarify what I want versus what I need in a partner? Because we often hear from folks, there's a particular, there's someone they're dating perhaps, or they're exploring things with, but they don't have this particular thing.
Yeah.
Like, how do I figure out, is this actually a deal breaker, or is this something that is, well, maybe nice to have, but not actually all that important?
Right. Yeah. And I actually want to add one more question to this list. Ooh. And a question that we'll start with, which is why be mindful about who you choose as a partner. It may seem a little obvious to some of us, but I think for others, there may be a sense of like, well, love, if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. Won't it just happen organically? Why should I be thinking about this? I want to share with you a few things about why it's really great to think about this. So billionaire Warren Buffett, he says, marry the right person. I'm serious about that. It will make a difference in your life. And he actually attributes his success to his first marriage.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. He says that his relationship with his first wife changed him as a person and really encouraged him to go out and do big things. And I think that the wonderful thing is that science really confirms what he's saying. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of really great research showing that the key to a happy life is meaningful relationships, and even more specifically with romantic love, we really know the impact of happy versus unhappy long-term relationships. So for example, we know that happy long-term relationships produce healthier human beings. We actually have less, say, heart disease or other health issues when we have a stable relationship. And then we also know that people actually live longer when they have healthy long-term relationships. I wanted to share this really cool study that recently came out of Tel Aviv that looked at health data for 10,000 Israeli men over 30 years. And they found that men who were dissatisfied with their marriage were 19% more likely on average to die during the 32-year study. Dark. And then strokes were 69% more common among those who felt they had an unsuccessful marriage compared to those who indicated a very successful marriage. They actually found that all of these risks were the same as if these men were smoking or not exercising.
Wow.
Yeah, so pretty huge. There's also a really famous study out of Harvard, the Harvard Study of Adult Development, that tracked a couple groups of men since 1938. This is a really sort of milestone piece of research. And they found, among other things, that secure relationships at midlife were a better predictor of health 30 years later than cholesterol levels. And just in general, those researchers, their big takeaway from all of that data was, if you want a happy life, have happy relationships.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I was just reading a wonderful book about relationships by Eric Barker, and he's citing, I think, some of that same research, but he also says that like happiness and sense of well-being for people who are in unhappy relationships was worse than if you were single.
Yeah.
There's like this high benefit to being in a meaningful, kind of secure, functioning relationship that kind of blows everything else out of the water. But there's also this flip side of, if you choose the wrong person or if you're in the wrong relationship for you, it can have a very big impact on your well-being.
Yes.
Like you were saying in some of those studies from Tel Aviv.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure there are people hearing right now that are like, yeah, no, I've lived
Right.
that.
Not news to me.
It's a very clear impact when we're in a dysfunctional relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe let's talk next about what science tells us about what makes a good long-term partner.
Yeah, I'm so curious to hear what you've collected on this.
Yeah, so I'm going to be pulling partially from Logan Urie's book, How to Not Die Alone, and she's really pulling from the Gottmans,
Right.
The good old Gottmans.
Source of so much wonderful wisdom about relationships.
That's right. So the Gottmans are a couple up in Seattle. John Gottman, they've been married for several decades, I think. And John was the lead of something called the Love Lab, where they actually brought couples in and really watched them closely. And over time, they were able to pick up on things that predicted the end of a relationship within a really insane rate. I think it was like 93% accuracy.
Yeah.
So one of the things that they looked at is the characteristics that they associate with what they call relationship masters versus relationship disasters. So we're going to talk about 7 of these characteristics. The first is emotional stability. Okay, so somebody who can really self-regulate, not give in to anger and impulsivity is going to be a wonderful partner in the long term. Second, we've got kindness. So think generosity, empathy, supportiveness. Third, we have loyalty, the capacity to remain connected and committed, even when things are getting really difficult. Fourth, we have a growth mindset. Okay, so instead of being, taken aback by challenges, self-critical, they're going to be motivated by those challenges, willing to learn. Okay. Personality that brings out the best in you is number 5, right? How are you around that person? Are you secure? Are you anxious? Whatever it is. 6th is skills to fight well. They can make repair attempts and really de-escalate conflicts. They're really going to invite in your perspective, make you feel seen and heard. And then 7th is the ability to make hard decisions with you. So the capacity to really take turns leading and following, somebody who can remain supportive and collaborative rather than, say, blaming when things go difficult.
Interesting. I'm curious, I want to dig in a little bit more to some of these. Emotional stability. This one just jumped out at me because I know for myself, and I imagine this may be true for some of the folks listening, I don't always feel emotionally stable. There are plenty of times when I feel, anxious or, having a hard time processing something that I don't feel like I'm acting my best.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious to kind of get into the nuance of that because on the one hand, I can totally see what they mean when someone is so caught up in their, worries or anxiety or anger or impulsivity that they can't pause, have a moment of pause between the experience they're having and the action that they take. It can be very difficult. It can cause some very painful experiences.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we're all kind of emotionally unstable some of the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really great point. We certainly don't want to take these points as encouragement to be perfect or to be, we don't have to be always happy or calm. So actually, I might jump forward a little bit to another study that was really interesting by a researcher called Samantha Joel. She used machine learning models to assess whether specific traits in a mate were predictive of happiness with that mate.
Wait, what? She used machine learning models to tell if certain traits were predictive of happiness in a mate.
Yeah.
That's mind-blowing to me right now. Okay, keep going. Sorry,
that's okay. It's an amazing piece of research. We'll talk a little bit more about all of that in a bit, but the thing I want to point out is what they found is that we look for traits typically that don't have to do with long-term happiness, don't have an impact on long-term happiness in a relationship.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
So like, for example, height.
Right. Perfect example. And what she found is that, interestingly enough, the thing that is the biggest predictor of happiness in a relationship is your partner's, how they would respond to questions like, are you happy, prior to the relationship? Are you happy? Are you free of depression?
Like how the partner would respond. So let's say I'm dating someone and we're talking about how this person would respond before we'd met.
Yes.
To saying, are you happy?
Right.
Okay.
And so, this to me felt a little bit like not great news because I have a biased sample as a therapist, and I see a lot of people who struggle with depression and with anxiety. Absolutely. And particularly since 2020, it seems like a tall order for everyone to, be in a position where they get to say like, yeah, I'm perfectly happy.
That would be nice if we were all in that spot before we got into a relationship.
Right. Yeah. And so what was encouraging to me, they said depression, negative affect, which is like experiencing feelings like irritability and shame on a regular basis, and insecure attachment are all relationship risk factors. And if people are able to establish what we call a secure functioning relationship, a relationship where both people feel safe and heard and important, those risk factors don't matter.
Wow.
Yeah. Isn't that fascinating?
That's very encouraging.
Yes. Yeah.
And it points to something actually really interesting to me that I've been thinking about as we've been preparing for this episode, that is how much of this is about like the individual qualities that we're looking for in somebody, and how much of it is about the relationship, who we are together.
Yes, 100%. And those things are connected.
Right.
I think what this brings me back to is like, yeah, you could have depression, you could have anxiety, you could have attachment issues. Many of us do. And the thing you have power over is building relationship skill. What does it look like to respond even when you are feeling emotionally unstable, right? Can you have those feelings and also be in relationship in a way that is functional and supportive of your bond?
Right. That's a really good point, because it's like we're not saying you have to have cleared up all of your feelings or your insecurities or your worries, your anxieties or doubts or whatever before you get into a relationship. It's really that focus on that skill set of, okay, can I develop my capacity to have that experience and still relate in a way with other people, with this person that kind of, how would you put it? I'm blanking on the words here, but like it is functional, like it gives them a chance to support you, gives,
enhances the closeness rather than increases it.
Okay.
So yeah, a great example I think is, let's say you are going through a bout of depression. For some people, depression actually manifests as irritability or anger.
Yeah.
And perhaps, everything's kind of getting to you. So in the emotionally unstable, quote unquote, realm, the way that might get expressed is your partner comes in, maybe meets you late for a date, and you chew them out.
Right.
Right.
It's like, what the hell's wrong with you? I've been waiting for you.
That's right.
you always do this. You're so inconsiderate of my time, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and we can all see where that goes. Nowhere fun.
Yeah.
And so the other option would be, okay, I'm feeling really irritable and my partner shows up late and I say, sweetheart, I'm really struggling right now with some depression or a down mood, and I'm just noticing that I'm feeling a little irritable. And I just need you to know it really means a lot to me when you show up on time. Right?
Even as you're saying that, I'm like, oh, I want to be there for you.
Yes, yeah. So being able to go into naming the emotion and asking for what we need, that right there is emotional stability. Because, hello, you're human. You're going to have a lot of emotions. Can you, draw people closer by expressing them without a lot of hard edges?
Yeah, and I just loved what you modeled there of like a way of sharing same experience that this person is having. But even as I was listening to you, I felt like, oh, I want to get closer to you. I want to support you. You're sharing this thing that's clearly maybe a little hard to share.
Yes.
Maybe feels a little scary to share. And that draws me closer versus the criticizing or kind of lashing out, irritability. That definitely pushes me away. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to really interact with you right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if on some level that person may be suffering and it actually isn't really about you.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and I really want to emphasize here, people may have heard those examples and kind of go like, I don't know how to do that, or that's very foreign to me. And I just want to emphasize, this is not like something you're born with. This is something that we learn. And so if that's something that you don't feel confident you can do, great news, you can. It's going to take maybe a little bit of practice and training, but totally doable.
Yeah, I love that. That's like the good news of all of this is that there are some very discrete skills that we can learn, both for ourselves to name and understand what we're experiencing and be able to express it in a productive way, and then also how to relate to other people around in those moments.
Yes.
And on either side of it, right, there's both how we are with what we're experiencing, but then there's also when we are in that the other partner's shoes, when our partner is going through something, how do we be with them in a way that is supportive and loving and produces more closeness instead of more distance.
Right, and is an expression of some of these other traits that we were talking about, kindness, loyalty, right? Can you show up in a moment where your partner's distressed in a way that, again, allows you to get closer?
I know one of the things that comes up for me when I hear the word loyalty is a worry that's like, well, what if I don't know if they're my person yet? Right? Like, I don't want to just be loyal to whoever walks in the door.
Yes.
And so we're looking at what to look for in a long-term partner. And so there's an interesting tension here between loyalty is a wonderful quality that you really do makes a big difference in a partner. And at the same time, we're trying to assess you don't want to just be loyal immediately.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I think there's a lot we could pull out in there. Dating is about assessing what is possible in a relationship.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a way to be loyal without having clarity or a stated intention to be there forever.
If we haven't made an explicit commitment to each other yet, like how do I know if loyalty is present? How am I assessing that? How do I know if they're really loyal?
Yeah, totally. So one way to look at that I appreciate Logan talking about in her book is to look at their other relationships.
Okay.
So do they have relationships with people from earlier in their life? There's some exceptions to that. Some people move around. And are they meeting with people from different phases of life? Because that indicates they do retain relationships over time. And then also just kind of getting a sense of their relationships. And they may make comments that indicate to you either that they stick around when things get hard, or maybe they cut and run. The other thing to look at there, I think, is when you are in distress in some way.
Mm-hmm.
How do they respond to that?
Okay.
Do they pull away? Do they shame or criticize you? Or do they stay close? Do they offer support? And even, I hear the piece in here about like, it's not always going to be appropriate at certain levels of dating for someone to like be your go-to person. Like maybe you've gone on a few dates.
Right.
It's not appropriate really to, lean on them in the middle of a crisis potentially.
Right.
And at the level that you're at, are they showing up? Okay. So I can imagine someone who's gone, on a few dates with someone else. If they understand that person's going through something, they might be reaching out, right? To say like, I'm thinking about you and I'm wondering how you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Is
Is there anything I can do to support you?
Yeah.
Versus like, gosh, I told that person my grandma's sick and I haven't heard from them in a week.
Right. Yeah. There's a whole other podcast or multiple podcasts I'm sure we'll make about episodes we'll make about pacing.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like we kind of can't talk about what to look for in a partner without talking about kind of pacing and how to, because some of this happens over time, right? You're not going to know all of this from the first date or the first month. There's some of these things that you'll learn, as you're saying, out of experiencing each other at each stage of dating and seeing how are they responding when I'm in distress, or how are we together when we're facing a difficult challenge, difficult decision to have to make, that you're going to learn so much out of that versus out of what we may say about ourselves or, like that.
Absolutely. I'm so looking forward to that conversation. And I think that what really struck me about these different qualities, these 7 qualities I've named versus the ones we'll go over later of like, what are the common things people look for that don't actually correlate to relationship happiness. The ones that we're talking about that the Gottmans, uncovered is they take time to assess.
Right.
And the other ones are like, you can assess them basically on a dating app.
Right.
And so I think that's maybe one of the like truths of dating mindfully for a long-term relationship. We have to take time to assess, and we have to allow that's just part of it.
Yeah. That's a really good point.
I have one more sort of like beautiful list that I think is a great way to wrap our minds around like what makes a relationship master who is emotionally receptive.
Okay.
This comes from Ken Page's work. He wrote the book and has a great podcast called Deeper Dating, one of my dating coach mentors from afar. And he likes to talk about attractions of inspiration. So attractions of inspiration are relationships characterized by ease and warmth. And we can identify an attraction of inspiration with a few different questions. For example, are you inspired by your partner's mostly consistent caring and acceptance? Are you inspired by their goodness, their decency and integrity? Is your love fueled by respect for the kind of person your partner is? Are you both willing to do the hard work of healing the relationship's areas of weakness? Do you like who you are in the presence of your partner? Does he or she make you a better you?
Mm-hmm. I love that list. It feels like it also points towards how are we together?
Yes.
Which I've just been loving that frame recently. There's like, because there is this interesting interplay between, there are some qualities that, you do want to look for in a partner, like you were mentioning earlier from the Gottmans. And there's also this quality of like, and how are we together? And we relate differently to different people, and kind of different people bring out different qualities in us.
Yeah.
And so it's not like a kind of right, wrong kind of assessment of like, oh, good partner, bad partner. Like, it's really more like good partner for me or not. Like,
yes.
What is our relationship like? How are we together? Are we, as you're saying, like, emotionally responsive? Are we kind? Do we respect each other? Is there room for both of us in the relationship, both of what we need and want, what's important to us?
Yes. Yeah, it makes me think about couples therapists. We like to talk about there's the individuals and then there's this third organism, which is the relationship.
Yeah.
And we're really, couples therapist is actually treating the relationship, not the individuals.
Right.
And so I think in dating, we can be assessing the we-ness from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So this makes me want to talk a little bit more about what doesn't make someone a good partner.
Ooh.
Dun, dun, dun. Ken Page, he talks about the attractions of inspiration, and he also talks about what he refers to as attractions of deprivation.
Okay.
So these are relationships I hear clients talk about often.
Mm-hmm.
They're easy to get caught in, and they are characterized by a sense of lack. Okay, so when I think of attractions of deprivation, I tend to think of, do you know the myth of Tantalus?
No.
From Greek mythology? Okay. So he was a king that was punished by Zeus for something he did. I don't remember what he did, but he was punished by being placed in a pool and near a fruit tree. But the water would rise up right below his mouth and then go back down over and over again all day long. And he was very, very thirsty. Mm. And so he wasn't able to drink any water. Mm-hmm. And the fruit tree was like just out of reach.
Oof.
Yeah. And he was super hungry.
Yeah.
And this is his eternity.
Oof.
So, yeah. And so I think these attractions of deprivation can have that experience where it's like, it kind of feels like we almost get the love that we really need, but then we never quite get all of it.
It reminds me of the kind of intermittent reward reinforcement.
Beautiful, yeah.
You probably know the studies better than I do, but the kind of thing where they've shown where rats and mice in cages, and I think this has also been shown to be true in humans, mm-hmm. where if we're intermittently reinforced for doing something, like we do something and sometimes we get a great result, and other times we don't, it's more addictive, more engaging. Kind of, we want to do it more than if we always get a good result.
That's right. Yeah.
And this is what drives gambling and all these other things. Anyway.
Yeah, it's a fascinating finding. Yeah, they found that the mice, when the mice were able to consistently push a lever and get food or some sort of substance, they were much less interested in the lever than the rats who pushed the lever and the food or drugs or whatever only came out some of the time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's exactly right. And Ken talks about that. This is what we're talking about is they're very, very addictive because that circuitry gets activated inside of us. We feel like maybe if I just try harder.
If I just do it right, if I just communicate in the right way to them, or if I just really understand them. And
Yeah, so characteristics of an attraction of deprivation, people may recognize these from their lives. This is when somebody may exhibit lying or cheating behaviors, selfish behavior, unavailability.
When you say selfish behavior, because I've been selfish, so I just want to clarify. What are we talking about when we say selfish behavior?
Yeah, good question. Well, okay, how about you're on a hike and your ankle starts to hurt a little bit and your partner really just kind of pushes you to keep going.
Okay, yeah. It's like they're more excited about finishing the hike than they are about taking care of you and your ankle.
You got it. So selfish behavior, unavailability, they maybe can't or won't commit fully, don't have time to spend with you. Addictive behavior, hurtful behavior, right? Maybe they're making digs or otherwise not really respecting you. Untreated or unresolved emotional or psychological disorders, and blaming or manipulative behavior.
And so again, with the untreated or unresolved psychological disorders, we're not talking about if you might be experiencing depression or anxiety. It's like a rule out for a relationship. We're really talking like what would be an example of that?
Yeah, so untreated or unresolved emotional psychological disorders, that might include bipolar disorder that is not being addressed through therapy or medication, or major depressive disorder where the person really just refuses to get help for it. We're definitely, again, we don't want you to come away from this thinking you have to be perfect or, perfectly well adjusted in order to have a relationship. many people have chronic depression and anxiety that they have to manage. So maybe an analogy might be like, say you are dating and you meet somebody who's diabetic, but they refuse to take insulin, for example, right? If somebody is experiencing depression and anxiety, how are they managing that? Are they going to therapy? Are they taking other self-care approaches or not?
Right. Like, are they getting support in some way? Are they engaged in their healing? All right. And I would imagine also some of these things point back to some of the other criteria on this list, right? Are they able to show up in a way that is kind, that is consistently available, where if, their experience of their mental health is such that they may still be getting support, but it's so intense right now that they just aren't consistently available.
Yes.
That may not be, at this time, the right fit for a partner.
That's right. Yeah.
And it can be so, this is the thing I think about these attractions of deprivation, it can be so tempting to want to be there to help them heal. Whether it's from addiction or whether it's from a major mental illness. And, I know I've sometimes had the thought like, well, if I'm not there, who else will be?
Yes.
Which is putting a lot of responsibility on your shoulders and kind of overemphasizing or maybe a distortion of our own importance sometimes, right? Like, oh, I have to save this person, when it's like, it's not about me or it's not about us, right? It's about, are they really available for the kind of relationship, the kind of mutual, equal relationship that we're really craving? Underneath that.
Yeah. Well, and I imagine there may be a question in some listeners' minds of like, what about the loyalty piece? Right. And I think that again, that comes back. So to flesh that out a little bit, okay, you just told me that I should be loyal and look for loyal partners. And then you're also telling me like, if someone's going through something and they aren't available for a relationship, I should just cut and run. That seems like it doesn't quite make sense. And I think, again, this comes back to like, are they doing anything to take care of themselves? There is, I think with the loyalty piece, we have to balance loyalty to ourselves and loyalty to the other person, right? If you're letting go of all of your needs and not taking care of yourself, that actually doesn't benefit the other person or the relationship at all.
Right. And I think there's also an interesting nuance here between what are we looking for at the beginning of a relationship and how are we with someone who we're in a committed partnership with?
Yes.
And that, loyalty obviously shows up differently at each stage. As you were saying earlier, at each stage of dating, we may want to pause before getting into a relationship with somebody, for example, who's experiencing addiction, untreated addiction.
Right.
That may not be the right time to be in a relationship with that person. Versus if perhaps our committed partner becomes, has an accident, starts getting pain medication for their pain, becomes addicted. It's maybe a different conversation. There is still perhaps a choice point at some point in there. We don't need to go too far down that rabbit hole, but it's just, there may be a different kind of process or like a way of showing up in that moment that we wouldn't have done at a stage of relationship where it's like 3 weeks into knowing this person. It's not appropriate for us to be supporting them at that level.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And I think part of what's happening in here when we're dating is we're making guesses at how someone will be long-term based on the information that we're getting.
Which is kind of a foolish endeavor, given how completely unpredictable life is. And, just fundamentally, we just don't know, right? We never know how things are going to turn out. We're just kind of taking our best guess. We're gathering the information we can and making, kind of as good and educated decisions we can now without, any promises about what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, it is a bit of a fool's errand, and we have to do our best with that process, right? And so I think that, if at the beginning of a relationship, you realize, gosh, okay, this person is really suffering from an addiction. Part of the thinking there is, well, if this is what I'm finding them in right now, the best predictor of the future is the past. And so I'm going to make the assumption that if he's not willing to get help, or if they're not willing to get help, then this may only get worse, right? Many mental health issues without treatment just get worse. And so at that point, it may not be accurate, but it may be self-protective. So those are the characteristics of an attraction of deprivation. I want to shift over back to Logan Urie's book, and some of the things that she pointed out are easily observable traits that a lot of people look for when they are dating, that research actually shows do not contribute to long-term relationship happiness.
I'm so excited for this list.
I'm wondering if you have guesses what is on this list.
I may have poked a little bit at Logan Urie's book as I was preparing for this episode, so I may have some thoughts or ideas. But I'm excited to get into the piece around attraction as well, which may be part of this list and maybe also in a separate conversation. But go ahead. I want to hear what's on this list.
So the 4 things that she discusses are wealth. And we'll add a little caveat here. Money does matter in general for happiness and for relationships, but only to a point. So after your needs are really met and a little more than that, going for the wealthiest partner isn't going to have any impact on relationship happiness. The second one is physical attractiveness. The reasoning there is lust fades, right? Even if you've got the hottest relation or the hottest partner you could imagine, your lust is going to fade over time. It's not going to go away necessarily, but we have to have more than that for the happiness. Similar personalities, and I think will maybe surprise some people, and also shared hobbies. Shared hobbies do not. It's so funny to me. I love that this is on this list because I always hear people say, well, I need to find someone with common interests. And that is not my experience as a dating coach, seeing a lot of relationships form. That really doesn't matter as much as people think it does.
Right. Interesting. Okay. So wealth, physical attractiveness. What's the third one?
Similar personalities. I'm introverted and I need an introvert.
And shared interests. Okay, but I think we should talk about attraction because that's
great.
That's I think some of the other ones are maybe a little bit less surprising or less kind of controversial, but a lot of us have this thought that well, I've got to be attracted to the person. And we don't even necessarily know what that means, I think, when we say that, right? There's a lot of levels of attraction that when we really unpack it, there are a lot of different ways that we're attracted to somebody. So yeah, I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on this because I hear what Logan Urie is saying about physical attractiveness and that fades over time and that makes sense. And our bodies change, right? So it's even if you marry the absolute hottest person now in 20 years, are they still going to look like that? No, they're going to have whatever. They're going to have little wrinkles and things and have gained weight and whatever. And so if you're just relying on that to keep your connection going, you're going to be in trouble.
Yes.
For any kind of meaningful long-term relationship.
Yeah.
And we want to be attracted to the person we're with.
Absolutely. Yes. We want to be attracted to our partner. It's important to be attracted to our partner. In fact, sexual satisfaction is one huge piece of long-term relationship happiness. Now, whether you are attracted to someone is a little different from physical attractiveness.
Tell me more.
So let's think about physical attractiveness as what does society say about whether or not this person is attractive? Okay. So going back to Ken Page, one of the concepts he presents that I love is, looking at partners, looking at your attraction to partners on a scale of 0 to 10. And what he's suggesting there is you're not looking at, is this person a 10 in the eyes of society? You're looking at how drawn am I to this person on all levels, okay? And he really recommends actually aiming for people who you are drawn to, regardless of what society says about them. Your attraction to them is between a 4 and a 7.
Wait, what? Hold up. So a couple of things here. Number one, so we're separating out, this isn't like a 10 on the hot or not, whatever online poll.
Right.
This is your personal attraction to them.
Yeah.
And you're telling me that we shouldn't go for people who are a 10 on our own attractiveness scale.
Yes, that's correct. Well, I mean, you can give it a try. The point.
Experiment at home.
Yeah, really. Go do research and development, see how that goes. I mean, for a lot of people, they do go for the what for them is a 10 out of 10, makes their knees weak and everything. Ken's point, which I agree with, is that oftentimes that's not just about physical attraction or, say, pheromones. It's also about some way that they get our attachment system going. Coming back to intermittent reinforcement, it's often people who there's some sort of intermittent reinforcement experience where we're actually not going to get all the things that we need from them. And we kind of pick this up on some level. They may be people who remind us of people from the past. And basically, they just get our nervous system a little bit activated in addition to attracted. And so...
So they get our nervous system activated in what way? Say more about that.
Yeah. Okay. So, these concepts feel like nesting dolls.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like I want to explain all the things. Okay. So you've probably heard the kind of pop psychology belief that we're attracted to people who remind us of our mom or our dad.
Sure.
Okay. So it's kind of along those lines. Other people, we project onto them. Okay, they remind us of people from our past without us even really realizing. Okay, and so for a lot of people, the 10 out of 10 is not just a hottie. Doesn't just fit our whatever type we might be drawn to. They often also, maybe on a very sort of unconscious level, remind us of somebody who we were very attached to, but maybe didn't get all of our needs met by. Okay. And there's a part of our nervous system that wants to correct that experience. Okay. So this is referred to as repetition compulsion.
Okay.
If you want to go real Freudian.
Ooh. Freudian.
So we're drawn to relationships where they remind us of past sort of unmet needs, and we want to fix that on an unconscious level. So if my dad was distant, I might have a tendency to be attracted to people who are a little aloof and may not be that emotionally responsive, accessible, responsive, engaged kind of person. But my nervous system gets really activated around them and kind of draws me closer to them in a way that feels like love, because my first experience of a man that I had deep love for was one where there was love, but also a lot of distance.
And so it can often feel, we kind of, I think, equate it to that experience that we see in the media and whatever, and the love at first sight, super intense, weak at the knees, the kind of romance novel, kind of experience. And what I'm getting, and what I think I've seen also in my own life, is it's very almost addicting.
Yeah,
it kind of has that experience of almost a compulsion or a kind of that intermittent reinforcement. We kind of get high off of it, and we kind of mix up some of those signals also about what is attraction and what is this other unmet need trying to get expressed or get met, that kind of feels very compelling, but ultimately is very likely to be pretty unsatisfying in a long-term relationship and not actually really meeting these deeper needs for connection and intimacy and safety.
Yeah, one of the chapters Logan has in her book is called F the Spark.
I really appreciate that title.
Yes, I know. I love that too. Yeah, and the sort of idea in there is, in healthy long-term relationships, oftentimes attraction is something that deepens over time. And it may not actually be present, like that sort of hot physical attraction that you associate with the 10 out of 10. That's not necessarily going to be present right at the beginning when you see them on the app, when you talk to them on the phone, when you meet them for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of thing deepens as you two create that really secure, warm connection. And I think that's very surprising for some people.
Yeah, very counterintuitive. It goes against all of the love stories that we see, or almost all the love stories that we see in media and books and TV.
Yeah. I really want to emphasize here, because I think it's easy to not hear this totally correctly. We're not saying that you should keep seeing someone if you are not attracted to them, or if your attraction to them is low and just keeps getting lower. That is not what we're saying.
Good. Good clarification.
As good a person as they are, you do need to be attracted to them, and going for noticing your own attraction, how it is over time, and maybe not going for the 10 out of 10. And also, just sort of letting go of, gosh, what does society think about this person and their attractiveness, and noticing your own draw to them on multiple levels: physical, emotional, spiritual, all of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so we're aiming for that 4 to 7 window out of 10. Just like you're saying, we're not saying, oh, if it's a 1, just keep going, you're going to get attracted to them eventually. No, we're not saying that, but kind of maybe dial it back from the most intense 10 out of 10, because that's going to cause you problems.
Yeah. So there are a few other of these traits that are like easy to look for, but not actually applicable or important in long-term relationships. I want to name from that same study I mentioned earlier from Samantha Joel, with the machine learning models that assess whether specific traits in a mate were predictive of happiness with that mate. First one, race or ethnicity.
Okay.
We have religious affiliation.
Really?
Yeah. Height. Occupation. Physical attractiveness. Previous marital status. Sexual tastes.
Interesting.
Last one, similarity to oneself.
So sexual taste, like whether or not they're similar to you or into similar things, doesn't actually correlate with long-term happiness.
Right. And I imagine, if we go back to what does matter, there's emotional stability, kindness, loyalty, growth mindset. The growth mindset in particular, Dan Savage talks about GGG, right? Do you remember what the...
Good giving and...
Good giving, do
game?
I remember? Good giving and game. You got it. So they've got some skill. That's a good one, right? See, I'm not even remembering. I'm like, here's a concept. I'm an expert.
Dan Savage. Yeah. My takeaway from that, I actually don't remember exactly what his definition of it was essentially that, are they kind of generous in the bedroom, and are they up for trying things? Are they willing to explore with you and experiment and kind of be in it together?
Yes.
So I think that's where you're going with that growth mindset.
You've got it.
Whether or not we have the same tastes, are you open to exploring? Are you open to being kind of experiment? Are you interested in helping your partner experience sexual satisfaction and joy and happiness?
Absolutely. You got it.
What's interesting, I think, about this conversation is that this list of what to look for in a partner is also, in many ways, a really good roadmap for how to be a good partner. And that one of the traps I think we can get into when we are dating, we're kind of serious about looking for our long-term partner, is we get into this very evaluative checklist, kind of assessing the other person. Are they this? Are they that? Are they that? No. Okay, next. And we forget about, how are we showing up? Are we showing up in a way that our partner will recognize us when they find us?
Yeah.
And that this isn't just about what can I get from this person.
Yeah.
In the words of my friend and coach Zoe Toby, what can I give? Right? That kind of switching from that, what can I get, what can I get, what can I get, to what can I give? Who are we together?
Yeah.
Do we have a shared vision for partnership, for our relationship, for the kind of life we want to have together.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're pointing that out, because I think that is kind of the downside of knowing all these things is you can go into, I see a lot of my clients struggling with this. They'll go into dates and it's like, I didn't really feel a connection. And like, I felt like it just sort of felt kind of businessy or formal or something. And
it's like, yeah. And I was sitting there assessing them on all these criteria,
right.
And I wasn't present. So it's, of course you weren't connected. Like you weren't there. You weren't showing up and being interested and doing the things that would naturally create a connection.
Yes.
And so it's such a, we can so miss the opportunities in that way.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to really kind of like settling into the truth of like really dating for a long-term relationship. It takes time.
Right.
So allowing you and the other person to take that time, right? Mm-hmm. And going into a date, yes, I want to be aware of things that they might be showing me, and like let your evaluative brain know we're going to take the time needed to really gather the information we need. We don't have to do it within one date. Mm-hmm. And I think that can really bring in more of that sense of ease and like, can we just be together and see what's possible when we're more present?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Okay. So that we've just talked about what does science have to say about what makes a good partner in a lot of wonderful depth here, mm-hmm. going down all kinds of wonderfully nuanced rabbit holes. So let's go into the second question here, which is, how do I clarify what I need in a partner?
Yes. Yeah, because research is research, and you are not a research study, you are an individual. Mm-hmm. And so the tool that we like to use on our team is, there's two tools actually. One is a relationship inventory. Okay. And this is where we are inventorying in a spreadsheet past relationships and all sorts of things about those relationships, including what it taught us about what we need or don't need in a relationship. Okay, so that's number one, looking at the past to gain some insight.
Okay.
And then number two is something called an ideal mate exercise. This I got from fellow therapist and dating coach Pella Schaefer-Weissman, and it's adapted from a book by David Steele called Conscious Dating. And basically, it's a 3-tiered list where you write out everything that you are looking for in a mate, and then you prioritize all of those different things. So those are our two main tools.
Okay. Are these tools that we can make available to folks?
They are.
On the pod?
Yeah, on the pod. Yeah, we'll definitely share those. Take a look in the show notes.
And is there any guidance or kind of main takeaways from those things that we could share with folks?
Yeah, well, we'll talk a little bit more about the ideal mate exercise in a little bit.
Okay.
One thing I'll just say about the relationship inventory, the point of that one is to really assess patterns. Okay. So part of what we actually have people do is we have them complete it such that they're completing it not by looking at one relationship at a time, but by looking at one dimension of all their relationships at a time. So for example, attachment style. Mm. Okay, so if they go through, they've got a bunch of relationships they're inventorying, they're looking at the attachment style, writing down the attachment style of each partner one at a time.
Okay.
So that they can really see the pattern over time if there is one.
Okay.
Okay. So that's number one. Number two, I think this is a really great way to look in particular for what we might refer to as like your relationship kryptonite. Mm-hmm. So if you start to see that you have like a soft spot for, say, I don't know, creative souls who also have untreated mental illness and an avoidant attachment style, therefore never commit to you. Mm. That's some good information.
Yeah.
Right. So we all have kind of those soft spots. And I think that only by looking back and really assessing things over time can we start to see them.
That's really interesting because as we were saying, we can talk about the research and all these things all day. And then there are different things for each of us that are those little points where we get hooked in mm-hmm. by an old pattern, for example, like what you're saying. and having some way to look back in our own lives and see, oh, this is what it is for me. This is how it shows up for me. This is what I need to be aware of.
Yeah.
Which is not going to be relevant for everybody else, but it's super important for you to know for yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. The other resource that I really love for this is Ken Page's book, Deeper Dating, which I mentioned earlier. There's a bunch of exercises in there to help you discover what he refers to as your core gifts. And his whole premise is that we all have gifts. And when we end up being chronically single or in relationships that are characterized by that kind of deprivational quality, oftentimes we are not finding people who can honor our gifts. So an example of this would be, let's say your core gift is a deep sense of kindness and you have a big heart. You may have a tendency, if you're not able to really learn how to honor that gift within yourself and choose people who honor it, you may attract people who are harsh and who are, not respectful of the fact that you have a big sensitive heart.
Okay.
Yeah. So that would be the main thing, is to do a little bit of that work on paper, perhaps with a friend or a professional, to really sense what are the things I've learned from my past relationships, and to get on paper, what are all the things I think I'm looking for in a mate.
I imagine, I actually don't know if you do this with any of the folks you work with, but I imagine that it may also be useful in there to understand what are those kind of on paper things like that I think I should be looking for, that we were talking about earlier, these qualities that don't actually correlate. What are those for you? Like, are you really set on having a partner who is, also really into outdoorsy stuff, for instance, or a partner who is a certain height? And really kind of asking yourself, actually one of our clinicians mentioned this to me, that she also often asks people, will this impact the quality of your relationship?
Yeah.
And really looking at that, right? It's like, really, will this really impact the quality of your relationship if you're not both outdoorsy, or you're not both, therapists, for instance, or you're not both really into gaming, whatever it might be.
Yeah, one of the things I really appreciated that Logan talks about with the common interests piece that's a little bit nuanced is you can absolutely have different interests so long as you manage that in a way that doesn't negatively impact your quality time together.
Right.
In either direction, right? Like if you want to give your partner freedom to do the things that they love if you don't love them, and they also need to be, spending enough time with you, dude, to really continue to deepen that bond.
Right. The other thing that I've found helpful in the past, and this also comes from Zotobi, who I mentioned earlier, he talks about creating an authentic relationship vision that is all about how are we together.
Yeah.
Talking a little bit more about what we were saying earlier, like what is the relationship? What is that kind of meeting of the two of you together? It's like, and so shifting from things like, they think the way that I do to we communicate openly and lovingly.
Yes.
That kind of, that's what we're attuning to, or like we're, we love wholeheartedly. Like, what are the qualities of how we are together that I want in a relationship? That will then help me navigate as I'm exploring relationships with people. Is my vision present here? Do we have a shared vision? Are we both really interested in, helping each other fulfill our purpose? That part of our shared vision.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. There's an exercise that I like to do with a lot of clients where we actually have them speak to their future partner, right? So I'm a drama therapist. I like to use role play and sort of imaginal work, and have a practice of speaking to that future partner and kind of feeling the energy of their rapport and of their dynamic. And I find that really powerful because it can be, we can shift out of the like cognitive analysis, this trait, and shift into like experiencing what we want to feel potentially, or what we will feel with that person.
That is so interesting because it's very much like what I remember doing when I was looking at online dating profiles.
Mm-hmm.
That I got to a point after doing more of the kind of looking for the check boxes, and I had whatever my things were, and not having great success with that, having some relationships that didn't go the way I wanted them to, and realizing the more that I was tuning into what's the energy of this kind of, what's the energy I get from reading this profile,
Yeah.
experience I have was far more reliable for me in finding people who at least were a good possibility for connection. And then again, leaning more into, what is that experience of how we are together? And I'm appreciating that and appreciating how important that is to be able to kind of tune into that energy without getting too woo-woo about it, but just what's the experience like?
Yeah.
What is it that I am going to feel? I'm going to feel recognized. I'm going to feel understood. I'm going to feel loved, deeply loved. Feel like this person cares. Feel like there's this quality of playfulness, of connection that we're both leaning in, we're both engaged, that kind of tunes our radar on a different way than when we're on that checkbox evaluative kind of approach.
Absolutely. I love that you did that.
Okay. So anything else that you'd want to say about how to clarify what I need in a partner?
I mean, I think maybe the last thought here is we aren't always great at knowing what we need. We all have blind spots. And your loved ones may be able to see some things that you're not seeing. I want to caveat this. Some of your loved ones.
Right. Yeah.
You really want to choose people who you trust and who you really trust their judgment and their sense of you. And maybe ask, what do you think I need in a partner?
That is such a sweet and vulnerable question, because it really is, you're kind of opening yourself up to very authentic kind of feedback and support. What a sweet way to invite in support from your friends. It's not just help me swipe on my profile or help me write my profile better. It's what do you think I need in a partner? It's going to really be good for me. I love that. The other thought I was just having about all of this is give yourself permission to experiment. That, and it can be a hard thing to do, I think, especially when we're dating kind of into our 30s and later in life, and it feels like there's sometimes additional pressure on timeline, and I've got to get the partner so I can have the kids on the time. And but I respect that it can be a very hard thing to do, but at the same time, we learn so much about what we really need out of our experiences.
Yeah.
And we can have the best thoughts about what we think we need. And then the only way to kind of verify is to go out and experience and go on dates and have some relationships. And out of that, you're really going to see, oh no, this is what's really important. Such
a great point. And to that point, we have a lot of clients who come to us who don't have a lot of relationship experience, and that this exercise of creating an ideal mate list and whatnot is very hard for that reason. And I think going for the experience is really important. And also consider non-romantic relationships.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Well, we all of us have relationships, whether or not we have a romantic history. And you've probably learned a lot about yourself and about what you need in relationships through your friendships, through your family relationships, through your relationships with coworkers. So if you don't have a ton of relationship experience, have no fear. You probably know a fair amount about yourself already just from looking at those relationships.
That's such a great suggestion, a great way to orient. Use all of your life experience to learn and grow.
Growth mindset.
Woohoo!
Yay!
Okay. Well then, maybe we'll round it out here with how do I clarify what I need versus what I want?
Mm-hmm. Such a good question. And I will tell you, basically everyone we work with needs help with this. Yeah. So in the Ideal Mate exercise, the exercise is basically like you write your full list. These are all the things I'm looking for in a partner. And then you split them into 3 lists. The first one is requirements, so the traits you cannot live without. The second is strong desires. So your relationship would survive with your partner if they didn't have these, but it might not necessarily thrive. I like to think of this one as like, what are the things I'd be willing to go to therapy over?
Interesting. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And the third list is wants. So the icing on the cake, the relationship can survive and even thrive without these.
Okay. Can you give me some examples of what types of things I guess it's probably different for each person, but what might fall into these?
Absolutely. Well, I would suggest placing all of the research-based traits mentioned earlier on the list in your requirements section. And within that, because you've done the relationship inventory and thought a few things through, placing like your specific versions of those things, right? So remember I mentioned earlier, kryptonite, if you have that soft spot for sensitive, creative souls who can't commit and have untreated mental illness, write that down. Mm-hmm. And then strong desires. What's an example of a strong desire? I mean, again, it really does vary.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking about for myself when I did my own version of this, when I was looking for my partner, when I was looking for you, that, like smoking. Smoking was a deal breaker for me. Mm-hmm. And it isn't for everybody, obviously. Like it's very personal to me, but I, as a person who is very sensitive to smells, it was just so, I knew it was going to be so hard on my system to be around somebody who was a cigarette smoker, that was a deal breaker for me. And I think probably strong desire for me was, I don't know, actually haven't thought about it in this framework before. Well, maybe strong desire might have been profession, that someone who is in a helping profession, who's like engaged in work that's really meaningful to them. I could have been okay if they were, maybe there's really 2 separate things in there, right? Helping profession, engaged in meaningful work. Helping profession, that's actually not a deal breaker, right? I could have been with somebody who was, a mathematician or something. And for all those mathematicians out there, I'm not saying you're not helping people, just to be clear. But the more like kind of therapist, coach, teacher, more like kind of that social end of the helping spectrum. And it just happens to be a nice bonus that I'm with somebody who is oriented in that way. Whereas engaged in meaningful work, that was probably closer to a deal breaker for me. I think maybe the most deal breaker version of it was they have to at least be interested in finding meaningful work, even if they haven't found it yet. They're on the search for work that's really going to fill them up. But really, I was very much hoping for a partner who loves what they do and is engaged in doing the work that matters to them.
Yeah. Ultimately, with this exercise, what we want to end up with is a list that clarifies for us, what should I be looking at to determine whether or not to go on another date with this person? And generally, it's the requirements list. Do I have enough evidence to tell me that they're meeting those deal breakers, essentially?
Right. That is a great, great point. Right. Yeah, I'm really appreciating that because that's all we need. It's another way of saying that maybe is like, is this a possibility worth exploring?
Yes.
Because as we were saying earlier, we don't need to know. In fact, it would be impossible to know from one date or a couple of dates, is this your life partner? All we can really answer is this a possibility worth exploring? Is this something that we want to keep going and see what develops here, see what our relationship is like? And if right off the bat, I want kids. This person doesn't want kids.
Mm-hmm.
Kids is a deal breaker for me. That's not a possibility worth exploring. They may be a wonderful human,
Right.
but they're not your life partner.
Right. Absolutely. Another thing I really love that Logan Ury talks about in her book is a lot of times people will put, for example, has traveled to over 10 countries or is this particular religion, et cetera. And ultimately, like, it's easier to identify like number of stamps in a passport. It's a little harder to identify adventurous nature. Right. And so we want to kind of like tune into if we have things that are maybe identifiable within a conversation or on an online dating profile, what is the quality you're looking for underneath that?
Interesting. Okay.
So for the wants, I do want to say that I recommend for the wants section putting all of the irrelevant traits that we talked about earlier. Right. So these are the easily observable ones. Like, I'll give you an example of like a good wants list. 5'10" or above.
Yeah.
I see that one a lot. Loves to dance. A chill personality like me. Right. Makes at least X. Not an accountant. I've seen that one. I'm sorry, accountants out there. I really appreciate you.
You do good work.
Never married. Right? These sorts of things. So again, it's still on your list. It may still be really important to you. And if it is in that category that, you know, research has said, like, this doesn't actually contribute to happiness, might be worth placing those in the wants section. Now, again, you do you. If there's something in there that you're like, no, I genuinely cannot, you know, date someone who is X religion, well, then you need to have your list reflect that.
Yeah, this isn't about doing what you should do because you think that's what it's supposed to look like. It really is a deep inquiry for you of what is on your, like, this is absolutely essential list. And for some people, it's essential for them to be raising their children in the same religion.
Yes.
And they need a partner who's at least going to be on board with that.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I also want to add about these lists is I find that people tend towards one side of a spectrum or another with this exercise. Either they have like a lot of requirements and a lot of them they consider deal breakers, or they're just kind of confused about what they need. They don't actually have a lot on the list.
Interesting.
And so I would have you really think about, would my friends say I'm a little too picky, or would they say I'm not picky enough? And that might really point you towards looking at the requirements list in particular and considering whether more needs to be on there or actually less. A really great question that I like to hold on to kind of clarify where things go on this list is, if I met someone with every other trait that I want in a partner, aside from this one trait I'm looking at, would I be willing to accept that?
Yeah.
I think that really clarifies, like, is this a deal breaker or not?
Yeah. That's a great question. Cool. Well, this has been a wonderful chat. I've enjoyed it. I hope other folks are enjoying it as well. Should we wrap it up here for today?
Can I say one more thing, actually?
Of course.
All of this may be a little bit overwhelming and may feel a little bit like I still don't feel clear. I really want to emphasize here, this is going to take a little bit of a process. Okay, so just thinking in your head about all of these things may not be quite enough. And so number one, put pen to paper. That can be so clarifying. Yep. And number two, get into conversation with a friend or perhaps a professional to really help you pull apart what truly is important for you. You don't need to do this alone. And in fact, I don't recommend it. Yeah, I am so grateful for all of the friends and coaches and mentors who have supported me in my journey with love and partnership. And it makes such a big difference to not be trying to figure it out by yourself. Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks for joining us for this episode today. If you found this episode useful, we'd love for you to leave us a rating and review in your Apple Podcast app. And you can find everything that we mentioned in this show in our show notes on
relationshipcenter.com/podcast. And until next time,
We love you too.
we love you too.